Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony from a panel of industry leaders who will provide their perspectives on CISA's Secure by Design initiative, including Secure by Design pledge, which captures the initiative's principles. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning. As cyber threats grow more advanced by the day, enhancing our cybersecurity posture has become one of the defining challenges of our time. This is due in part to how we have traditionally treated cybersecurity, as an add-on rather than essential. We've relied on patches and software updates to fix vulnerabilities once they are discovered. Now that malicious actors can exploit weaknesses faster than we can address them, our reactive approach will not suffice. To address this issue, CISA launched a Secure by Design initiative in April 2023, an effort that encourages companies to prioritize cybersecurity at the outset of product development. As part of this initiative, CISA created a pledge that captures the 7 key pillars of what it means to be secure by design. These encompass actions for improving software security to increasing transparency about incidents. Since the pledge was released in May, over 250 companies have signed on, underscoring widespread industry support and commitment to raising the bar for basic cybersecurity practices. Today's hearing provides a valuable opportunity to dive deeper into Secure by Design framework. In particular, we'll consider how Secure by Design has benefited individual companies while enhancing cybersecurity across sectors and our nation. From my perspective, Secure by Design is a proactive commitment to making cybersecurity part of a company's core mission. It represents a shift toward viewing security and innovation as complementary, not competing priorities. As consumers, we must not only want, but also expect that products we purchase are secure out of the box. To that end, we must remember that this initiative has worked because it has been voluntary. To continue to incentivize security as a standard practice rather than a costly add-on, it must continue to have industry buy-in. Companies have implemented Secure by Design principles at a speed and scale that suits their business model. Likewise, CISA has fulfilled its role as a trusted partner by offering implementation guidance and facilitating critical conversations with pledge signatories. I look forward to discussing the pledge's successes, challenges, and potential for the future. We risk losing the collaboration if companies are forced to adopt requirements which they cannot meet, especially since many are already burdened with duplicative cyber regulations. I want to thank our witnesses for their time and expertise. Your insights are critical as we work to strengthen partnerships between government, industry, insurers, and other stakeholders in the cybersecurity ecosystem. I hope this discussion about the Secure by Design initiative will provide a clearer picture of what's working, where gaps remain, and how we can continue building the partnerships and policies necessary to enhance our nation's cybersecurity posture. Thank you, and I look forward to our conversation. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for his opening statement.
Good morning. I would like to thank Chairman Garbarino for holding today's hearing on Secure by Design and Secure by Default. In recent decades, we have witnessed remarkable technological progress that has changed every aspect of our lives. And with rapid advances in AI, we can expect that transformation to continue in the years ahead. Much of this innovation has taken place, of course, in America, but also in my congressional district. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Mr. Srinivas Mukkamala, in particular, my invited guest because of his connection to my district. The competition between technology companies globally has also led to the development of new products and services that have benefited people around the world. A challenge with this digital revolution is that the innovation that has transformed how we communicate, store our data, and access vital services has not always been matched with the level of security necessary to protect us from foreign adversaries and criminal gangs. Every day we read about cyber incidents that demonstrate the security built into our digital ecosystem and that it's insufficient to protect our privacy or critical infrastructure. To combat this problem, we must rely on the same innovative spirit that has fueled our recent technological progress to also transform our security. This idea underpinned President Biden's national cybersecurity strategy when it was committed to building toward a future digital ecosystem that is more inherently defensible and resilient. And under Director Easterly's leadership, CISA has led the way with its Secure by Design initiative, partnering with allied countries and private sector partners to develop principles on how we can better embed security into technology. Critical is an understanding that security must primarily be the responsibility of those with the most resources and expertise. For too long, the response to many cyber incidents is a reminder to turn on multi-factor authentication or training on how to spot a phishing attack. Don't get me wrong. There's a role for cybersecurity training and best practices for end users. But humans are fallible, and asking consumers to defend themselves against well-resourced criminal gangs and nation-state actors is a doomed strategy. Instead, we must reduce the burden on end users by embedding security into technology and turning on security features by default. I'd also like to just acknowledge Ms. Adkins, who is representing Google. I have noticed in my own Gmail some of the recent upgrades that make it much harder for an outside actor to access Gmail, and I think all users are appreciative of that. This fundamental shift in how we think about security will not be easy, and it will take time, resources, and cooperation between government and the private sector. The efforts we have seen under the Biden administration have made significant progress, but we must continue this initiative in the coming years. Today's hearing is an opportunity to hear directly from private sector experts on the promise of secure by design, the challenges we will face in shifting to this new paradigm, and how the federal government can support and incentivize improved security. It's critical that terms like secure by design and secure by default are not just buzzwords and marketing schemes, but result in meaningful change. I hope our witnesses will help this subcommittee better understand how we can support private sector innovations in security and move toward a more secure digital ecosystem. Before I close, this is likely our last subcommittee hearing before a new administration takes place. CISA's Secure by Design initiative is just one example of the many vital projects that CISA carries out. Efforts in the next administration to weaken or abolish CISA could have devastating impacts on our national security, and I hope that we can continue to work, as we have this Congress under the chairman's leadership, in a bipartisan way to support this vital agency. And with that, I look forward to the witnesses and their testimony. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Swalwell. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I am pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic. I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. I would like to now formally introduce our witnesses. Heather Adkins is a 22-year-old Google veteran and founding member of the Google security team. As VP of Security Engineering and head of Google's Office of Cybersecurity Resilience, she's built a global team responsible for maintaining the safety and security of Google's networks, systems, and applications. She is co-author of the Building Secure and Reliable Systems and has advised numerous organizations on how to adopt modern, defendable architectures. Shane Fry is the CTO at RunSafe Security, Inc. He has over a decade of experience in cybersecurity, both offensive and defensive. Shane began his career performing vulnerability assessments on a variety of software platforms. His research has spanned all the layers of hardware and software stack, including physical circuit security, secure boot, software updates, memory corruption, and web application vulnerabilities. Shane has worked for the U.S. government, a large prime contractor, and numerous cybersecurity startups. So Jim Richberg is Fortinet's head of cyber policy and global field CISO. This role enables him to leverage his nearly 40 years' experience driving innovation in cybersecurity and threat intelligence. Prior to joining Fortinet, Jim served as the U.S. National Intelligence Manager for Cyber, the senior federal executive focused on cyber intelligence within the U.S. intelligence community. He led the creation and implementation of cyber strategy for the 17 departments and agencies of the IC, set integrated priorities on cyber threat, and served as the senior advisor to the Director of National Intelligence on cyber issues. Dr. Srinivas Mukkamala, is that right? Wonderful. Serves as the Board of Regents for New York Mexico Tech, independent board member of El Paso Electric, State of New Mexico's Governor's Advisor on AI and Cybersecurity, Advisor Cowbell Cyber, and Advisor Security Scorecard, among many other advisory roles. How are you here today? That's a lot of work. He served as Chief Product Officer for Avanti, where he was responsible for product management and engineering. Dr. Mukkamala founded RiskSense, recognized leader in risk-based vulnerability management. Avanti acquired RiskSense in 2021. I thank all the witnesses for being here today. I now recognize Ms. Adkins for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and other members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm Heather Adkins, and I'm Vice President of Security Engineering at Google. Billions of people today rely on technology in their daily lives to run their businesses, further their education, for entertainment, shopping, and many other things. And in this interconnected world, it's critical that we ensure technology systems are resilient to keep people safe. As we know from the news, that is not always the case. Throughout my career in cybersecurity, I've had a good vantage point from which to study how security breaches occur and the succession of events that cause them. And what I've learned is that whether or not a system is resilient is a question of whether it's designed properly. Cybersecurity is an inherent property of the system in the same way that safety is an inherent property of an automobile. And for this reason, for over 20 years, Google has pioneered a secure by design approach, long before we called it that, embedding security into every phase of the software development lifecycle, not just the beginning or the end. And this year, we published a detailed white paper on our approach titled An Overview of Google's Commitment to Secure by Design. My testimony today will share some insights from that paper. First, we know that many attacks start with social engineering, where an attacker tricks a user into taking harmful action. In 2023 alone, Americans lost $12.5 billion to phishing and scams. To combat these kinds of threats, Google has invested in bringing multi-factor authentication to all of our users. And this journey dates back to 2010, when we launched Google Authenticator and two-step verification for Google Workspace. And since then, we have expanded this to all of our services and worked with the FIDO Alliance, an industry coalition, to develop standardized hardware tokens to stop password phishing. And this coalition has also developed industry standards such as passkeys, a passwordless sign-in experience which has been used to authenticate users more than 1 billion times. The industry goal is to eliminate passwords altogether, a design flaw on the internet that has persisted for decades. Second, attackers exploit entire classes of vulnerabilities that stem from how software is written, and we've been working proactively to reduce the incidence of these as well. Our approach starts with safe coding frameworks and secure development environments, meaning we give our developers the tools to write safe code by default rather than relying on them to understand everything about cybersecurity. By doing this, we've been able to prevent many of MITRE's 25 most dangerous software weaknesses from entering our code base, such as cross-site scripting, the #1 weakness, SQL injection, the #3, and others. And by reducing the number of vulnerabilities we create in the development process, our users are safer by default. And we believe this is the most scalable approach to building resilient software. Third, we know that when a vulnerability does surface in our products, it's important to issue fixes quickly and to be transparent. We believe that vendors should seek to reduce the burden on end users by making it as easy as possible to apply software updates. Google Chrome and Google Chrome OS, for example, automatically update on behalf of the user so they're protected as soon as possible. And we know the speed of deployment of patches is crucial to reducing the attacker's chances of their success. In the interest of transparency, we also issue CVEs and security bulletins for products that may require users to take action, including Android and Google Cloud. And this transparency also gives external parties insights into the type of vulnerabilities we observe and address. In addition to our internal proactive measures, we also collaborate with the industry and engage with the external research community. For example, via our vulnerability disclosure policy and our vulnerability rewards programs, we've connected with security researchers all over the world that have helped us secure the products. And since we launched these programs in 2010, we've distributed 18,500 awards, totaling nearly $59 million US. Finally, when users and businesses use our products, it's important to notify them about possible intrusions into their accounts and the best practices to stay safe. We do this via warnings in their Google account, just like a car dashboard might alert a driver to an issue with the engine. And this allows users to check on the settings of their accounts using a checkup tool and also look at personalized recommendations. Enterprise users using Workspace and Cloud also have access to logging information to triage the impact on their business. And these dashboard alerts are available in our products by default for no additional cost. This is just a brief overview of what we've done over the last 20 years. The dedication we have to incorporating secure by design at Google, and we know our work is not done. Securing the digital ecosystem really is a continuous effort. It's a team sport. We need industry partners, policymakers, security experts at the table. So I thank you for holding this important hearing, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adkins. We've been joined by Congressman Menendez. Happy to see you here, my friend. I now recognize Mr. Richberg for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I appreciate this opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Jim Richberg. I serve as Head of Cyber Policy, Global Field CISO at Fortinet. Prior to my time at Fortinet, I served in the federal government overseeing implementation of government-wide cybersecurity initiatives for Presidents Bush and Obama, and serving as the National Intelligence Manager for Cyber under 2 Directors of National Intelligence. Fortinet is a U.S. company that is one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the world. And while we manufacture over half of the firewalls sold worldwide, our portfolio actually extends across nearly 60 different integrated security and networking solutions. We also run an award-winning cybersecurity training institute with educational partners across the U.S. And we appreciate this subcommittee's focus on cyber workforce efforts, including the Pivot Act. We have a broad domestic footprint of over 4,000 employees in the U.S. and people or infrastructure in virtually every state. And we recently hosted committee staff for a workforce development discussion at our headquarters in Sunnyvale, California. And Ranking Member Swalwell, we appreciate you taking time to visit our facility in Union City. We have facilities across the country, including Florida, Texas, Georgia, and Illinois. Now, I represent Fortinet in the council that serves as the IT sector's voice and partner for collaboration with CISO. And the council asked me to help lead its collaboration with CISO on Secure by Design. Industry was already working on Secure by Design, but as a concept, it gained prominence as a part of the 2023 National Cybersecurity Strategy and in subsequent CISO-led white papers. These described the potential of Secure by Design, but did not constitute an actionable roadmap for IT manufacturers or their customers to follow. So CISA began to work with our IT council to craft this voluntary pledge that software producers could use as a starting point. The team that worked on the pledge focused on selecting items that would be achievable by small business, but also provide scope for improvement by larger and more capable companies. Our philosophy in crafting the pledge was to agree on what to accomplish and to leave it to pledge signatories to determine how to tackle each of these goals. We were also mindful that pledge goals should yield tangible improvements to user security and produce measures of progress that could be shared publicly. The pledge was released in May 2024 with 68 companies, including Fortinet, signing it initially. Currently, as the chairman has noted, over 250 companies ranging from small software developers to the largest IT firms in the world have signed it. Pledge signers agreed to work on 7 specified goals and to report their progress within 1 year. Fortinet has been making significant progress on each of the pledge goals. I'd be happy to go into specifics in response to your questions. I volunteered to lead industry's collaboration with CISA because of my personal belief in the value of this approach, and because Fortinet has an ongoing commitment to the core concepts of Secure by Design. Radical transparency is one of those concepts. It's the idea that IT companies should disclose their product vulnerabilities, whether these are found internally or externally, and Fortinet proudly adheres to that tenet. And for too long, Companies have cited each other's vulnerabilities in misleading marketing rather than acknowledging that everyone should find and mitigate vulnerabilities. We hope this pledge helps mature the sector's approach to this important issue, which is one that affects both cyber resilience and economic competitiveness. While Secure by Design has been shown by Fortinet and other early adopters to be achievable, this approach will only succeed if it is valued by the marketplace. And unfortunately, this is not like the movie Field of Dreams, where if you build it, the customers, will automatically come. The crucial step will be in creating viable Secure by Demand. In my work with executives at major companies, I've found that few of them have heard of Secure by Design, but that virtually all of them are interested in considering it as at least a possible factor in procurement. And at this point, customers can likely find a supplier in most major software categories who has signed the pledge. In my experience, letting market forces drive change is a powerful and practical approach to improving security and resilience. While Secure by Design is not a panacea, it can be a powerful lever for a private sector-led progress in cybersecurity. This concept is a work in progress, and like the process of creating the current pledge, its success will require continued public-private partnership. I thank you for the opportunity to be part of this important hearing and look forward to today's discussion and your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Richberg. I now recognize Mr. Fry for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Green, Subcommittee Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and esteemed members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to address you today on CISA's Secure by Design initiative. My name is Shane Fry, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer of RunSafe Security, having joined the company in 2018 after spending time in the U.S. government and then commercial organizations performing advanced cyber research. I spent the majority of my career focused on devices commonly found in critical infrastructure. Implementing the practices of Secure by Design has helped RunSafe Security improve the security and reliability of our software, and thus the security and reliability of our customer systems, which include critical infrastructure and military weapons systems. It took us approximately 6 months to write our relatively small code base into Rust, including time to verify completeness and perform extensive testing. Since signing the Secure by Design pledge, we've integrated SBOM generation into our builds and plan to host these SBOMs publicly alongside each of our releases. We strongly believe that companies pledging to do Secure by Design should do so as publicly and transparently as possible, and our pledge has accelerated our plans to be more public about the security posture of our software. Secure by Design is a robust program that stands to shape development practices for decades to come. It has helped reinforce important cybersecurity concepts like software supply chain security and memory safety. It serves its role well as a North Star for software and device developers, and its importance can be seen by the large number of companies that have signed the Secure by Design pledge. The mechanics for organizations to achieve true, complete Secure by Design, however, can take years or even decades for existing software and systems, risking the program's relevance if bridges to Secure by Design aren't encouraged. As it pertains to critical infrastructure protection, the vision of Secure by Design meets the reality of legacy hardware, trillions of lines of code, and complex vendor supply chains. Unfortunately, our adversaries won't stop their campaigns of weaponizing our critical infrastructure to achieve their geopolitical objectives while we get our cyber house in order. In a hearing before the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party in January, witnesses laid out with stark clarity that China is pre-placing cyber weapons inside our critical infrastructure in order to disrupt basic citizen services such as water, transportation, communication, and energy. FBI Director Wray also indicated that if every cyber asset at the FBI was directed to counter China, ignoring all other threats, China's hacking forces would still outnumber the FBI assets 50-1. Companies we're working with have told us it will take 8 years or more to fully implement aspects of Secure by Design. So with 50 times our assets and 8+ years to continue placing cyber weapons, our critical infrastructure might not be ours by the time we're Secure by Design. One of the key but otherwise esoteric issues covered by Secure by Design is memory safety. In recent years, NSA, ONCD, Congress, and CISA have all increased visibility on the risk caused by memory safety issues. Memory safety attacks take legitimate software and stitch pieces of them together in unauthorized ways to hijack the system. Memory safety vulnerabilities account for about 70% of vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure and often have the highest severity rating. Secure by Design guides device manufacturers to rewrite all their software into a memory-safe language like Rust, According to former Gartner analyst, the cost of rewriting that software can be approximated, though, between $40 and $70 trillion. For many reasons, that transition to Rust is mechanically impossible within the next 5 years, leaving our infrastructure exposed to attack. Studies undertaken by firms at the leading edge of automating code rewrites to Rust indicate that tools are only able to safely handle about 5% of the effort. DARPA's Tractor effort will hopefully improve that, but we're a few years out from real results there. Finally, there are extensive challenges utilizing memory-safe languages in industries with safety certification requirements. Despite the challenges we've discussed, the committee has many compelling paths forward, and CISA's investment in Secure by Design will be essential at every turn. So please allow me to present some suggestions on how industry and government can work together to meaningfully improve the security of critical infrastructure. First, CISA should revise Secure by Design to encourage device manufacturers to immediately implement existing commercial solutions that prevent exploitation of memory safety vulnerabilities. Second, the U.S. government should lead by example. All government-developed or required software should require compliance with Secure by Design. Third, Congress should find ways to encourage critical infrastructure asset owners to update software in a timely manner so that Secure by Design updates are actually deployed to fielded devices. Fourth, CISA should include critical infrastructure manufacturers in its Secure by Design pledge program. CISA's pledge explicitly excludes physical products, which ends up excluding most industrial control systems products. And the results are clear. None of the major industrial control systems device manufacturers have signed the pledge. Finally, Congress should incentivize development of safety-certified tooling for memory-safe languages. In closing, Secure by Design has had a tremendous impact on industry, but it has a long way to go before we can collectively declare victory. Thank you for the opportunity to testify to this esteemed subcommittee today. I look forward to answering your questions, and I appreciate your focus on this very important program.
Thank you, Mr. Fry, and I recognize Dr. Mukkamala for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Gabrino, for having me here, Member Swalwell, and rest of the committee members. So my name is Srinivas Mukkamala. So I have a very unique representation, being a Board of Regents of New Mexico Tech, which was just featured. Thank you. Which was just featured in the RAND report last week on kinetic warfare and how the United States will be up for a rude shock. And that work is actually being done south in the southern border of the United States called Paso, where we look at every single communication system and look at if there is vulnerable software, how can they take down our men and women in the front lines? This was just published last week. I also represent a utility, one of the largest utilities in the country, which also owns the largest nuclear power plant and a border, supports 3 bases, and I'm an independent board member there. And also represent Cowbell Cyber, which is in Congressman's district, which ensures small and medium businesses in an event, if there is an unfortunate thing, how do you really defend yourself? So a very interesting perspective from 3 different walks of life, training the future cyber citizens, really looking at how do you power AI, generating power, the livelihood. And the third one is, if you're at an incident, how do you recover from that? So I was a fortunate recipient of the congressional support for getting my degree in AI in cybersecurity in 2000. A lot of people talk about cybersecurity today. Very few of us actually were trained in cyber, in AI 25 years ago. We didn't learn on the job. We didn't learn it by choice. We actually went to school for that. That gives us a very good understanding about the fundamentals of what's working and what's not. So what I want to focus is a class in 2001, which was paramount, software integrity class. It was taught in major universities. Zero defect software was the theme, and written by Alan Stavely from New Mexico Tech. We cannot have software with errors. I'm talking 25 years ago. And the case study which we all studied was the Thorac 25. It's a race condition that killed people with dosages. Today, 25 years later, we're talking memory safe, we're talking race conditions. And it's one of the examples CISA talks about you can't have in your code. 25 years later. In 2005, a program called Built-in Security by DHS with Carnegie Mellon was introduced. Again, a voluntary program. Every vendor said, we will follow this. We will have built-in security. 20 years later, we're still talking secure by design. I think we have a fundamental challenge. And we are up for a root shock. The 2 alarming scenarios I want to bring to the committee's attention. The first one is a multi-trillion-dollar tech debt program. It's a real problem. We talk about financial debt. We talk about printing money. We have a real tech debt problem. The second one is we have $1.4 trillion worth of software installed on systems running critical infrastructure around the world. This is what's giving the adversaries an asymmetric advantage. It is not their sophistication. Yes, they're sophisticated, but it's really the software errors that's giving them the advantage, and not us being resilient and not being able to respond on time is allowing the so-called Chinese actors, North Korean actors, you name the actor, to own our systems and cause havoc. And one of the questions we should ask for ourselves, when we have system of truths like National Software Reference Library, we have the National Vulnerability Software Library, NVD. Why don't we have a national legacy software library? Because that brings real transparency. As a consumer, I know I'm using a legacy software. Why are we not developing that nationally and educating the consumers? That will force the vendors to get away from legacy software. We expect the consumer to know what they're buying, but unfortunately, we might not. The three things I want to bring to the committee's attention. We need to have transparency, and lack of accountability is not helping. That needs to be enforced, and that needs to be really brought to the forefront. The second one is we need to define classes of vulnerabilities. We keep talking about different rankings, top 25 most dangerous common weaknesses. That ranking changes every other year. There is a legacy ranking, there's a current ranking, and when you start looking at the future rankings for AI, which we all are talking about, it's a very different ranking. So what am I going to hold you accountable for? What is your guidance? What do you really want us to do? And the third one I want to really talk about is software safety is not a choice. It is not a design thing. I mean, design is important, but you cannot. I mean, you won't even buy a stroller without a safety symbol on it. Why am I using software without safety symbol on that and letting critical infrastructure run? We regulate medical devices. We regulate utilities. We regulate every single thing around us. Why not software? I think it's paramount. It's about time to make sure there is assurance on the software that's being put on consumers that runs national security systems and critical infrastructure, so we all can be assured and be confident that we are actually running a reliable software and we are not at danger. With that, thank you for this opportunity. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mukkamala. Members will be recognized in order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize Mr. Zell from Mississippi for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everybody's been impacted in one way or another by these cyber attacks on CrowdStrike, Microsoft, and several others. So I'm pleased that we're continuing to have a discussion on this very important matter. The Secure by Design pledge is a good step towards incentivizing businesses to create more secure products. I want to be clear that while I support efforts such as these, I'm always concerned by efforts to codify or mandate these requirements for businesses. Mandates are often duplicative, costly, and burdensome in time and resources. We have seen over 250 companies, including our industry representative witnesses here today, already sign this pledge to improve and strengthen their cybersecurity. And I want to just kind of go down the line with all of you today. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your commitment, for being here today. I'm sure you could be plenty of other places, so thank you very much. And I'd like to discuss a little bit more which of the 7 pillars has been the hardest to adopt and why. And I'll start with you, Ms. Adkins, and just kind of go down the line.
I would say there is complexity in all 7, but I would probably rank classes of vulnerabilities as one of the most difficult. And the reason being is that to really fix this problem in its kind of purest form, you have to change the way developers work. And in the workforce, at a company, you have some control over that. But we rely on third-party software, we rely on open source software, where we don't have any control over how that software is developed as well. So the kind of full list of materials that go into the software is hard. So we've had to spend a lot of time really innovating in that space to make sure that the way we write code is safe. And now with generative AI, we've got this great new tool actually that we think, after 3 to 5 years of research, we're going to have an even better tool. Yeah.
Would anybody else like to comment about that?
So I would indisputably say number 3 on tackling entire classes of vulnerabilities, but I bring guilty knowledge as someone who literally helped craft the things. Some of them are very, very binary, one and done. Do you have a policy on vulnerability disclosure that lets people test you? You write it, you don't. This one was intended as the stretch goal for companies like Fortinet and Google, where tackling, by the things we've talked about, memory-safe programming languages, addressing SQL injection, that one was intended as something where there are a large number of classes of vulnerability. You can succeed in tackling them serially, but even for big companies, it's going to take us a long time to knock off all of those.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead.
So I would agree. I think tackling all classes of memory vulnerabilities is probably the hardest. The number of developers out there that can write code in those memory-safe languages is very limited. They are the most expensive engineers you can pay today, and that's really challenging. Now, there are some classes that are easier to solve than others, and there's definitely great frameworks for that. The other thing that I see in talking to a lot of industrial control systems manufacturers is not the generation of software bill of materials, but the willingness to share them. So they treat them almost more than the intellectual property of their source code. And that, I think, is a huge challenge for some of these companies to overcome, is accepting that part. But they're going to be way behind on the memory safety conversion as well and getting that whole class of vulnerabilities covered.
Thank you. Doctor?
So I would like to add an important aspect. I agree with Ms. Adkins on that is the hardest problem for 3 reasons. There's a human involved. And most of our developers today are not trained in software security. That is a real problem. They lack training. And the other thing that's also causing a real issue is majority of the software is actually built offshore. I can give an example for India. Indian universities do not train their students, not have a curriculum on software security. I was trained in India, still today. I was looking at a curriculum from the top Indian Institute of Technology, IITs, which majority of the CEOs in this country are from those schools. They're undergraduate, they're not trained in software security. You have a critical gap. That's number 1. Number 2, we have legacy software. We might not even have the source code for us to go back and look at what are the weaknesses and what are the vulnerabilities. You're looking at compiled code. You have limited visibility into that. Even if you find a vulnerability, people are very concerned because it's not well documented. You're going to break something. So you'd rather leave it the way it is. And the third most important thing, which we are not talking about, Ms. Adkins talked about, AI will really help us going forward. At the same time, you'll also have a lot of machine-generated libraries, machine-generated code. What we haven't seen is it good, is it bad, or will it create a new class of weaknesses and vulnerabilities that we all have to learn from and live with? So those are my 3 key points.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez, for 5 minutes of questions.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, thank you for convening today's hearing. Cybersecurity is no longer just a technical issue. It's a matter of public safety and trust. Across New Jersey, institutions have suffered devastating ransomware attacks that threaten essential services and public confidence. Just last week in my district, Hoboken City Hall suffered a significant ransomware attack, paralyzing vital municipal services and underscoring how vulnerable public infrastructure can be. This incident also echoes previous attacks on educational institutions, such as Stevens Institute of Technology in 2019, and more recently, New Jersey City University, highlighting a worrying trend. Ransomware operators are increasingly focused on exploiting the limited cybersecurity resources of local governments and schools. Ransomware operators are increasingly focused on exploiting These incidents serve as more than just isolated disruptions. They represent a growing threat to public safety and economic stability. This reality demands a proactive, coordinated response from industry and government alike, rooted in principles like those found in CISA's Secure by Design initiative, which aims to shift cybersecurity responsibility from consumers to technology producers. Today, I look forward to our focus being on understanding how we can move beyond reactive security measures, and instead more towards a proactive framework that builds resilience into our systems from the ground up. Mr. Mukkamala, you and I agree that vulnerabilities in software can have far-reaching consequences, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure. In your testimony, you discussed the importance of making Secure by Design a fundamental part of software development to prevent critical vulnerabilities. If the next administration fails to build upon this initiative, what are the immediate and long-term consequences we could face, particularly regarding cyber attacks on critical infrastructure?
So, Member Carter, the most important thing for the next administration is to really hold software vendors accountable. Right now, we are expecting the consumer to be resilient. And majority of the consumers, you touched on educational institutions, K-20, they don't have the resources. You're talking about utilities. We're talking about digital transformation, automation. There is no security guy sitting in a utility. At the best, you get 2 or 3 people. But you're talking about livelihoods of hundreds and thousands of people. You've seen American Water just got impacted by ransomware. And when you start looking at how many security folks do I have that are trained in cybersecurity who understand software, not systems, software, it won't even be a handful of people. We have a real problem. That's why it's very important for the new administration to, one, not encourage vulnerable software in the federal government. It starts there. The second is also hold software vendors accountable. If there is an error, there should be some sort of a liability because of your errors.
Okay, I appreciate that. And recent cyber incidences like the ransomware attack on Hoboken City Hall that I mentioned earlier underscore the vulnerabilities municipalities face. This attack, which occurred last week, forced City Hall to close and suspend online services. IT teams isolated the infected computer to prevent further damage, and essential services like the municipal court had to be relocated temporarily. Investigations are still underway to determine the extent of this cyber attack. My question to you is, how do you see the principles of Secure by Design reducing the burden on under-resourced entities like local governments?
So first, there's already software running. It's vulnerable. I don't think we will fix an attack right away. That's a very important thing. For the future part, we need to make sure the software that's being delivered is secure while we look back and look at what systems are vulnerable so we can avoid these attacks. And from the grant we have today for the state, local, and educational, there's actually a grant from CISO to support these local communities. The future administration should continue to support that. We cannot take away funding from the little money they have to secure the under-resourced organizations. We can continue to support that. At the same time, we need to do continuous diagnostics. I know CDM is not a famous thing in the federal government, but if you don't diagnose, if you don't detect faster, you can't remediate. The most important thing is we need to continue to detect, continue to prioritize, and continue to remediate. And that's what we should be focusing on to avoid future attacks.
Appreciate that, and I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. And I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Ms. Adkins, you mentioned in your answering a question to Mr. Zell that one of the things we have to do is change the way the developers work. You know, when you're deputy chair of the Cyber Safety Review Board, so you have a unique understanding of the importance of public and private partnerships and working with the private sector. And you briefly touched on it again in your answer with Mr. Zell about the 7 pillars. And there's issues, you think, with all of them, or there could be issues with all of them. Can you go into more detail?
I would say I wouldn't characterize them as issues, I'd characterize them as complexities. So for example, when we went to implement multi-factor authentication for our infrastructure and our users, many of the usable solutions didn't exist. And actually, users reject unusable solutions. And so you have to go back to the drawing board and reinvent the way things work. That's a complexity for multi-factor authentication. When we're looking at some of the others that are in there, I think about If you, for example, want to start a vulnerability disclosure program, but you haven't improved your software quality, what you're going to immediately get is thousands and thousands of reports that you already knew. And it's actually not that valuable to you. So there's a journey on each one of these steps that everyone has to walk through.
Okay, so, and you brought up multi-factor authentication, and we know it's not all created equal, and there's threat actors have actually been able to find a way around some of the multi-factor authentications. What can be either Ms. Adkins or Mr. Richberg? What could be done with the 7 pillars, or what could be done with that when we're talking about secure by design?
So we set the 7 pillars, the 7 portions up to be a floor and not a ceiling. And multi-factor authentication was one of those. To your point, we recognize, and there was discussion, should we specify phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, something like your phone that's cryptographically bound to you, not a text or an email that can be intercepted. But we said, recognize we're doing this not only for the big companies, but for the small startups. That's a high bar for them to clear. Anything is better than a user ID or password. So let's let them start with something. Let's also recognize this pledge is likely to be serial. We'll learn from this, and then we might have, because this is a voluntary pledge, a 2.0. We certainly talked about there's nuance in multi-factor authentication.
But if we're going to have a floor, when we're talking about secure by design, should the floor be secure? I mean, and if it's not, I mean, how do we? And I get the complexities with the startups and how to, but we still want them selling. We still want them selling a secure product if they're working on this, correct?
But for the things that the pledge is measuring, yes, we agreed these would all represent progress. Any form of multi-factor authentication is better than single-factor authentication.
I agree with
Now, there can be more nuanced ones, and we recognize because those are commercially available, most companies would jump to that. But we didn't want to produce a pledge that prospective signatories would look at it and say, some of these are too hard, because this pledge was envisioned as all or nothing. It's not mandatory that you make progress on them, but we in CISA didn't want companies to cherry pick, I'm going to sign the pledge because one of these things I can do.
Ms. Adkins, you had to.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in here too. The FIDO Alliance, which is the industry coalition looking at FIDO protocols, so things like security keys, passkeys, understand this is a transition timeline, but we are now at a place where passkeys are actually the most usable solution, and they are far more secure than things like SMS-based MFA. It's time to push everyone there, deprecate SMS, at least here in the United States.
That was my next follow-up. I was going to ask you about passkeys, and you jumped to it before I even could. Mr. Fry or Dr. Mukkamala, is there anything you want to add to this discussion? I don't want to. I see you not, Dr. You've been nodding, so I'm not sure if there's something you wanted to add. Okay, Mr. Fry, nothing. You good? Okay, and okay. So now I wanted to, Mr. Richberg, CISA released the Secure by Design guidance for the IT community, and your expertise is in OT. Does the IT guidance work for OT? And if it doesn't, why, and what might be some foundational elements of OT guidance that should be included?
The short answer, because I know I'm short on time, is it doesn't.
No, you can keep going. I'm the chair.
It doesn't work for OT. They share some complexities in terms of the way you think about security, but it is a much different timeline. It's a different crowd. They tried grafting the pledge to the OT environment. It doesn't work. You've got the companies, the handful of companies that make the core chips for ICS and SCADA. You've got the larger number of companies that actually make the operational technology for specific industries. What you use for making cars is different than power plants. And then you've got the companies that buy it and customize it. They don't run it off the shelf. It's a different ecosystem. We turn over IT in 3- and 4-year cycles. OT lasts for 30 years. So how do we implement Secure by Design in something they may not want to buy for 15 years? It's a different ecosystem. The first version of the pledge looked like lift and shift, did not work. It's back to the drawing board. Full disclosure, we had to do that 5 or 6 times on the IT pledge with CISA.
Sounds like OT you can't even do secure by design on some of these because of it. Let's go to Mr. Swalwell first, and then we're going to do a second round of questions. I yield back, and I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you. This is a distinct informed panel that we have, and I'd like to start by just asking for your take and wisdom on the most recent FBI warning regarding the use of Android or iPhone, and essentially recommending that Americans in their text messaging move to more encrypted applications. And I would just start with you, Ms. Adkins. I mean, it's quite alarming from a just data privacy, potential critical infrastructure for those who work in that space who use Apple or Android. Like, what can you say to that warning, and what should Americans know?
That warning doesn't surprise me at all. It echoes advice that the security industry has been giving for a very long time. We understand that strong encryption is absolutely necessary for protecting information, whether it's in enterprise systems flowing over the internet, cell networks, et cetera. What we did in Android, I can't speak to Apple's ecosystem, but what we did in Android a little while back is to start to move away from SMS for texting into the RCS protocol. This works a little bit higher up the stack, and we can provide transit encryption that would protect you from the particular threat you're referencing.
Now, is it correct, though, that I believe this is so with iPhone, where if you do not back your iMessages up on the cloud, that it's more protected than if you do, because if your Apple ID is hacked, then you can go directly into the messages, whereas you would only need you would have to actually get the device to get the content.
What you're talking about is one layer up in the protocol sandwich. Sure. But RCS is a replacement essentially for SMS. And then on top of that, in Android, we provide a comparable feature in messages. So if you're on an Android phone and you're messaging someone on an Android phone, at the most top layer, that is encrypted end-to-end.
So how about an iPhone to an Android phone?
So the interoperability at that layer is something that we would really like the industry to do. It doesn't exist today. But the industry group that works on RCS, this is the GSMA group, took up in September that they're going to look at end-to-end encryption, which would be interoperable between all the systems. But we're huge advocates of strong encryption to protect Americans in this situation.
Would anyone else like to speak to this most recent warning?
I think I would talk about it in a little more abstract fashion, in the sense that I agree with what Ms. Adkins is saying. Industry groups, industry interoperability will solve it. Asking individual users to download a third-party app to secure themselves continues to perpetuate this idea that yes, you are responsible for your own security, but you shouldn't have to be the executor of it. That's what that's the crux of Secure by Design. We should do that, we in industry.
Thank you. Mr. Fry.
Yeah, I think it's a great discussion point. And one of the things, taking it maybe a step further, is not just end users, but as you talk about people that are deploying software and systems that maybe aren't you and I, but IT, ISPs, and telco providers, they need that Secure by Design as well. They're not going to be experts in a Fortinet switch or an Android device. They're an expert in sending phone messages and calls across the country. So, Secure by Design really has a great opportunity to impact that. And by extension, you and I are protected from that as well. But we've got to really look at what's out there today, as well as what we're going to put out 5 years from now, and make sure that we're not just looking at the future, but what can we do for devices that are in data centers and server rooms across the country today.
And if, say, a Chinese government actor or a criminal gang actor was able to access, millions of Americans' content using AI, you could piece together information about that individual to access, many of, their most secure and protected possessions, from bank records, health records, et cetera. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Dr. Mukkamala.
The warning is a little too late. I'll cite a simple example. Folks in the intelligence community have been using Signal for a long time. There's a reason for that. This warning should have come almost 5-10 years ago. And we have known for a long time telecom infrastructure was susceptible to attacks. We have known this right after 9/11. When we said, let's go get every communication, put a tap on so we can see communications back and forth, what does it really mean? You can go look at communications. We have known this for 21 years. And we should have paid attention to that. And we should have created secure protocols from a communication standpoint. What I'm afraid is, when you start looking at sensitive devices communicating with each other, we still don't have that. We're focused on consumer grade. At the same time, there's so much back-end processing that goes on in critical infrastructure, all on clear text. Right. I think that's the next real ticking time bomb for an adversary to intercept operational communications that will take down a power plant, that will take down a water facility, that will take down automobiles, which are running autonomous today. I think that's where we need to be really paying attention to on securing communication channels.
Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll now start our second round of questions, guys. I know there's, Ms. Lee is on her way. Ms. Menendez, do you have, no? Okay. Let's go back to recognize myself for my second round of questions. Let's go back to the OT conversation we were having. Mr. Richberg, you were about to say something. I know Mr. Fry wanted to jump in, so let's get back at it.
So I think it is going to be a soluble problem for OT, but I think frankly they rushed it. They knew they needed to try to get something done, and they thought they could port it. And the initial version is frankly, I don't think going to be viable, and it'll be back to the drawing board. And it's very much, we're at the point, I think, of whiteboarding. What exactly is it going to look like? Because you have different players in the ecosystem, you have different priorities. For IT, quite often you can say security can be as important as anything else. We know for OT, it's going to be safety, reliability, then maybe efficiency or performance, and then security is going to be number 4. So it is going to be something where the concept applies, but I think because the values, the players, and the timelines, and frankly, constraints are different, we're going to have to come at it differently. But it's going to be critically important because I know this subcommittee's jurisdiction includes critical infrastructure. You've got these small players in the infrastructure, rural electric co-ops, small water utilities, who the same guy who cuts the grass and paints the building keeps the IT dusted, and if it doesn't do its own security, there is no security. That's the reality where any level of secure by design for OT will be meaningful.
Mr. Fry?
Yeah, so the additional clarification that I would bring is that the companies that we talk to in industrial control systems, some of the top manufacturers, they're actively trying to figure out how they can be secure by design. So while it may not have been originally designed for OT networks and OT systems and devices, there's a lot of communication happening in those companies to figure out how can we achieve this. Now, interestingly, a lot of that was just discussion. How can we put an industry panel together? How can we comply? Since the EU's Cyber Resiliency Act has come into effect, there's been actual motion of assigning engineers to doing work to become compliant with the Cyber Resiliency Act. And so that gives me a lot of promise that the US will benefit from that, and where I think device manufacturers for OT systems will actually strive to become secure by design because there's so much overlap in the Cyber Resiliency Act and secure by design.
Back.
An example, does a radiologist work for a general physician? One is vertical focused, the other one is horizontal focused. IT is very horizontal. You go maintain your systems. When it comes to OT, we club it as one thing. It's a very vertical focused, and it's a black box. It's very domain specific. And the digital transformation is bringing IT and OT together, and you really see loggerheads. One is go patch your system, the other is with what? I don't have a firmware patching. I don't have a patching vendor that does patch my firmware. I don't even know what the underlying system is because I just took a fork from a Linux, stripped it down, and that's my OS today. I don't know what libraries are in there because that's not documented. There's a lot of unknowns when it comes to vertical focused OT. Again, comes back to the workforce. Are we training cybersecurity folks in water systems? You're learning on the job. You didn't go through a formal education. Would you ever let a radiology technician come look at a patient without going through a formal certification? So we have a fundamental gap on how we look at the convergence and what's going on today. Unfortunately, the industry is moving so fast, and we will have no choice but IT and OT to work together, and that will also get converged on more generalized. And as vendors learn what it is, you'll actually see some vertical training and vertical focus as well.
Thank you. Ms. Adkins, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think the one thing we haven't talked about here that really strikes me about OT is we haven't talked about the recoverability story. And the war in Ukraine is an incredible case study for us as an industry to see how cyber attacks against their infrastructure are being recovered from, and actually how you can negate the effect of a cyber attack if you can recover within minutes or hours. And so while we think about the journey on Secure by Design for OT, we also need to think about the bridge. What are we going to do in the meantime? If that's a 5 to 10 year journey, what's the story for the electric company, the water, and whatnot? And I think it has to be some kind of very tough conversation of here's your performance indicator. Make sure you can recover the system within X period of time.
Mr. Richberg?
And then I think, because I work a lot with these utilities, the challenge is they're regulated utilities. They can identify a need, but they then have to go to a state utilities commission to get the approval to raise the rates in the future to pay for it. So they're always lagging with resources what they need to fix.
And I feel like the utility commissions don't always understand what necessities are. I have out of my second round of questions. Just wait for the ranking member, see if he wants to go again. Yeah, you can yield to me. Well, we'll go to Laurel first then. I recognize the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. Thank you all for being here. Dr. Mukkamala, I'd like to start with a question for you. In your written testimony, you mentioned the Forbes article, A $1 Trillion Global Tech Problem, which talks about the benefits of using automation and streamlining operations, but emphasizes the importance of starting with a thorough audit of existing tools and systems. Would you tell us a little bit more about why that is the important starting place and how we might use artificial intelligence or other tools to assist us in performing that kind of audit?
So Chairman Lee, it's a great question. First, the hypothesis is you need to know what you have. And that's what is missing. In 2019 audit from the federal systems clearly identified multiple systems running legacy software with critical vulnerabilities, exposing our country to foreign actors. That is, United States government does routine audits. That's how they identified that. When you start looking at small businesses, state governments, local governments, higher education, they don't have the resources. They don't even do regular audits unless required by compliance. And if you don't know what you have, you don't know how you can secure that. And if I can't secure it, I'm running a vulnerable machine. My simple analogy is we go do regular checkups at 40. We start when you're born, we stop at 16, we don't go back to a pediatrician, we come back again, start at 40. 16 years to 40 years, you're a walking time bomb, right? You're hoping you're healthy, you're a superhuman, and nothing is gonna happen. But 40, suddenly the clock starts, we need to go get our annual done. For systems, unfortunately, we don't have that. We have to do a continuous thing, not even a periodic. So that's why it's important to go back and take a look at what do I have today, in what mission am I on, what am I running on these systems, and then assess how vulnerable you are. You can't fix everything. Then you have to prioritize what am I going to fix, and then really start building towards what we consider resilience. In an absence of resilience, you have to build mechanisms so you can recover if there is an incident on your organization.
Let me interject there because I think you're touching on something that is very important. So prior to coming to Congress, I was responsible for running a state agency. And one of the greatest challenges that we had was doing exactly what you described. Identify what are the things that we have, what exists, Then, how do we deal with all of these legacy systems and their vulnerabilities, and do that in the construct of procurements and the appropriation process? Government in particular is so poorly suited to be nimble and be efficient and forward-thinking when it comes to integrating new technology and identifying and guarding against those vulnerabilities. But one of the things that you just mentioned was also recovery. If and when there is an incident, how are we going to get back up to operating? So I'd love for you to talk about those two things in a little more detail. One is how we should think about navigating away from these legacy systems. Are there good approaches or best practices to trying to identify and then leave them? And then second, best practices on having that redundancy so that when there's an incident, we can continue to operate.
So great question. I mean, fortunate enough to have a lot of experience working with multiple states and also advising about 6 governors today on the exact topic. I'll go back to 2008, state of New Mexico, went through barrage of incidents. Governor Richardson was at the helm of the state. Deloitte was the vendor that was doing annual assessments, charging arm and length to tell them what they should do and giving PDF reports that nobody would even touch. This is 2008. Fast forward, 2015, now we have multiple regulations that states have to comply. Actually, more regulations than what the feds think. 1075, CJIS, MARZI, you name it, FERPA, multiple regulations. So they're forced to go do their audits with very limited resources. The reason they even scan their systems today is because there is an impending federal audit, and I'm going to scan the system. And that's not enough. Today, when you start looking at where the vulnerabilities are, we're still talking vulnerabilities. Unfortunately, vulnerability is too late. We need to be talking about, do we have coding errors in the software we are developing, co-developing, and using? That's a weakness. We need to know what weaknesses are that would lead into vulnerabilities. Then we have to look at what are the ones attackers took time to actually develop and exploit. That's weaponization. Then you have to look at and say, which are the ones that are already weaponized they're using? So it's really a life cycle in itself. And most states, most corporations are not even equipped. So that's the space called risk-based vulnerability management, which coined in cyber war in 2008, a project called Cactus, supported by Congress. Which vulnerabilities will we use to attack our enemy networks? We turned that around and said, okay, let's go use it for vulnerability prioritization. We created that space in 2011. Today, that's not enough, and we're looking at exposures. Weaknesses, because not every vulnerability is patchable. Coding errors, somebody has to go modify the code. If I have a vulnerability, if I can patch it, I can patch it. The stats as of this Monday, there are more than 268,000 known vulnerabilities reported between NVD and other CNAs. There are only 68,000 that are patchable. That is a striking alarm. So this is becoming a data problem, not a cybersecurity problem. So with states, you're collecting more data than you can consume. That's where AI can really help in being able to consume this data at a faster pace, really prioritize and focus on the critical systems with a functional context. If I'm serving Medicaid, I want to go focus on that system first, then trying to focus on a system I'm doing the regular stuff. To answer your second question, states don't have enough resources for resiliency. They don't operate on N+1 resiliency. I don't have a system to system. That's where recovery becomes a real thing. The basics they focus is backups. And when in audits, every single time, even the federal audits, you see systems not being backed up regularly. So at the minimum, to really get ahead of ourselves from ransomware, we should back any and every critical data, and that should be enforced.
Gentlelady's time's expired. I now recognize Gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. McIver, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Thank you for allowing me this time. I want to thank the ranking member and our witnesses for joining us today. Of course, today we're here to talk about Secure by Design. An effort aimed to ensuring cybersecurity infrastructure is included in new technologies from the very start. I represent New Jersey's 10th Congressional District, along with my wonderful colleague here who represents the 8th. We have many overlapping cities who experienced some cyber attack shutdowns. Most recently, we had a situation in the city of Hoboken, which I'm sure the congressman talked about, and we also experienced something in the city of Newark of different cyber attacks that have happened with our Newark Housing Authority as well as our city of Newark City Hall, and we saw some attacks on our health systems as well. So we continue to see attacks on our state and local governments, small agencies as well, and Secure by Design can definitely be able to tackle some of these problems that we see happening with these entities. So one of my questions to all of the witnesses to answer is, what challenges do you foresee in applying Secure by Design principles to smaller entities, such as that I mentioned, rather it's smaller municipalities, smaller healthcare systems, and centers in underserved and under-resourced communities?
So Secure by Design is really set up as something the vendors should do, which then the small consumers will be able to benefit from. And I know that the Congresswoman from Florida mentioned procurement. Procurement is the weakness, especially for local government. Those people in the highway department may know if a project is going to be built that's a good bridge. They won't know anything about sensors. They need those types of things to be built into the product. They need it to be Secure by Design because those under-resourced organizations can't do it. You mentioned medical. The FDA, under the Patch Act, is actually a couple of years ahead of CISA in implementing what really looks like Secure by Design with the medical industry, and they're making a lot of strides over the past year.
Thank you.
I think it's a really interesting discussion point because as we look at Secure by Design affecting vendors, the downstream impact is that these small municipalities won't have to worry as much if their devices are secure. But it does bring an interesting question of what are these small municipalities supposed to do today? How can, if we assume that suddenly everything is Secure by Design tomorrow, those small municipalities still have to apply updates. They still have to understand what devices and software they even have in their ecosystems. And so they're still going to have some focus to understand that I have a secure version of this that I need to update to. And that's where advocacy and potentially funding at the state and federal level can help those smaller municipalities get to secure systems today. And the faster we can get vendors to do Secure by Design and solve some of these problems today, the faster that funding can be effective, or those efforts in those small municipalities can help make their systems more secure.
Thank you.
It's understanding what they have is the most important thing, and the burden needs to be moved from the consumer to the vendor. When we start looking at these two fundamental things, we will solve a lot of problems. And the DHS program that's allowing the small municipalities, cities and counties, and public education to look for what vulnerabilities do they have is really helping quite a bit. There's a lot more scanning activity going on their systems today than ever before. And the recent addition of the E-rate program, for the first time now public schools can apply for cybersecurity as part of their technology funding. That is a great move by the Congress because that's really going to help these K-12 institutions look for systems that would have impacted kids from learning online, because it's very important for rural America. I mean, New Jersey is blessed because it's urban America. When you look at states like New Mexico, Mississippi, Alabama, these kids can't travel. They have to take online classes, and if our systems go down, they're out of learning for weeks. We can't afford that. We can't leave children behind because of ransomware. Again,
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry, Ms. Adkins, my time is up. Thank you so much for that, Chair. Ms. Adkins, anything to add?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a really good one, and I'm sorry to hear what's happening in New Jersey. This is unfortunately a plague that we are seeing across many places. It is possible to build systems that are resistant to ransomware. There are many on the market today, and there will be many more coming as we have this conversation and they come to market. It's important that through procurement, through consumer choice, that people have access to be able to make those choices, to bring in modern operating systems and modern software. That is ultimately the solution to this problem over the long term.
Thank you, Ms. Adkins, and I yield the rest, well, no time, but I yield. Thank you.
General yields back. I now recognize Mr. Swalwell for his second round of questions.
Great. Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to go back to Dr. Mukkamala. Your testimony highlighted how GAO has found legacy systems with known vulnerabilities are operating across federal agencies. What are the obstacles to upgrading existing legacy technology, and how can we address this challenge of insecure legacy systems? How should addressing legacy technology be integrated into Secure by Design?
So thank you, Ranking Member Swalwell. The number one fear is breaking the functionality of these legacy systems. I mean, that's where it starts. And the second important thing is the unknown. We don't know what systems we're running. The GOI reports talks about it, but we didn't take it further and say, let's go study the entire federal complex, civilian and intelligence community, and say, let's catalog what legacy systems do we have today, what functionality are we serving, and what is the legacy software, who are the vendors that are responsible for it. What's happening that is alarming and interesting is these vendors of legacy software are still charging the federal government for support, for maintenance, yet having only one or two people run a $100 million business. And the federal government is okay with that. It's the accountability piece, right? If you're selling me software that's legacy, that's vulnerable, and you have 3 people supporting it, we expect nation states not to attack us. So coming back to the question, it's the breaking of it, it's the black box approach, and not knowing what's really vulnerable across the federal ecosystem.
Great, thank you. And go ahead, Mr. Richberg.
I actually would take a different tact on that as a former federal executive. It's funding, it's resources. I mean, I remember spending time down in the chambers explaining the OPM breach, that we had seen something like that coming because we knew we were running a Fortran system that we could not get funded to recapitalize and upgrade. So yes, we may have trouble understanding some of the intricacies, but the reality is there are a lot of IT modernization plans that simply don't make the cut to ever be implemented.
Great. Dr. Mukkamala, I get to play like the role of professor here, so
I mean,
go ahead if you
absolutely,
want to
funding
respond.
is a thing. And then here, I'm actually, the federal government is already spending money. Yes, we might not get to a modern system because it takes a lot more time, implementation, and it's reworking of the entire process. That's not easy. That's one of the reasons why people don't get off legacy systems. It's the cost of moving to a newer system. You see that quite a bit, not only in the feds, in the state as well. The challenge is, if you're paying an IT vendor X dollars, are they really deserving those X dollars? I don't see that being asked.
Great. With that, after playing the role of judge or professor, I'm going to yield back to the chair. Thank you.
Gentlemen,
Thank you again to all of our witnesses.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey for 5 minutes questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield my 5 minutes to you for
Oh,
additional.
thank you. The gentleman, very, very kind of you.
Oh,
Thank
you'd
you.
appreciate that.
Mr. Fry, I wanted to ask you a question. Your company signed the pledge. What's the benefit of signing the pledge? I mean, it sounds like by signing the pledge and, going along with the pillars, you don't get a stamp of approval saying secure by design. So what's the benefit of a company signing the pledge?
So I think there's a couple different things that are really important. For us as a security company, it's important that we lead by example. Just as I've asked the federal government to lead by example for acquisitions, it felt very wrong for us to not be writing our code as much as we could in memory-safe languages, to have the Secure by Design pledge as something that we're doing. It kind of feels hypocritical to not be doing security as a security company. And so that's really been one of the big driving factors for us, is we've wanted to do this. The pledge and Secure by Design coming out was a good timeline to say, let's do this publicly. And so that's been really helpful for us. The benefit to other companies is that, as all the witnesses today have said, is a more secure ecosystem. and also the ability for security-conscious consumers to decide who they want to buy software and devices from. They might choose to prioritize security. I hope they would. That's something that we see in the OT space. You're going to be locked in for 20, 30 years with this software, this device. You should buy that more secure version of that. So that's why the pledge is so valuable to us.
Thank you. And I have 4 minutes left, and I want you all to have, just to be able to make a closing statement. So, Mr. Fry, we'll start with you, but if you can just limit it to about a minute, and then we'll go to everybody else, because I know, Mr. Regberg, you want to make a comment. But, Mr. Fry, something you just wanted to make sure is put on the record today, because this is a very important hearing.
Yeah, I think it's very obvious that Secure by Design is making a lot of waves, but we can't lose sight of the fact that there's software today that is not secure, that's deployed in these small governments and utilities and things like that are going to need security. We have to do something about the software that's deployed today, and we have to make sure that that isn't just the IT systems, that it's got to be the OT systems as well. So I'd like to call all the OT device manufacturers, let's do the Secure by Design pledge. Let's work with Congress and find a good way, or CISA to find a good way to incentivize these companies to actually secure their systems, because I think limiting it to just IT systems is a little bit short-sighted. I understand we have to do something that we can do quickly. It's a good first step, but we've got to continue to push further and make that impact across the ecosystem.
Thank you. Ms. Adkins?
It is technically feasible to solve many of our security problems, but it will require a few things, ingenuity and innovation being almost the easiest of these. The hardest being the work that companies will have to do to rip and replace, and what that journey will be like. We've got trillions of lines of code on the internet. Some portion of that will have to be checked, rewritten, deprecated. And then the systems that actually get deployed are important. So we need to think not only about the technical components of this, but also the policy components, procurement, the whole ecosystem that plays into how do we make not just digital transformation, but the digital retransformation that has to happen.
Thank you. Mr. Richberg?
To put what Ms. Adkins said a slightly another way, the hard stuff is the soft stuff. It's not the technical problem. We have technical fixes for this. The premise of Secure by Design was that field of dreams things I said. If you build it, users will flock to it. Well, my experience talking to Fortune 500 executives is they don't even know about this. But when you tell them it's here, they say, if I have a choice between product A, B, or C, and one of those is from a company that has signed the pledge and is willing to let my people see what they've done to implement it, I'd like to factor that in. So with a new CISA management, maybe talk about, do we include this in Cybersecurity Awareness Month? Industry is not going to stop doing this. They weren't mandated to do this. You look at the 251 companies that have signed it. We represent a majority by sales volume, I suspect, of the IT activity in this country. We're doing it because this is good cyber hygiene. So how do we take advantage of the bully pulpit of letting potential consumers know this is out there? Factor this in as you replace your technology.
Thank you, Mr. Richberg. Doctor?
Secure by Design is a great initiative. We need to continue to do that. And the ask for the new Congress is to continue to support it. And we have to focus on the fundamentals. What that means is reskilling, upskilling our existing workforce. Secure by Design talks about companies focusing on the technical aspects, but nowhere in this pledge, the people who signed it said, my workforce has these gaps today. We're going to address a fundamental workforce problem. I think that absolutely needs to be brought back into first principle thinking on upskilling and reskilling our workforce.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you all for the witnesses for coming today and your testimony. And I know you've all worked with CISA quite a bit, especially on this. We have as well. And I'm going to miss Director Easterly when she leaves. And I know the ranking member also worked very well with Director Easterly. And I'm looking forward and interested to see who will be taking over CISA next year. And with that, without objection, the members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for you all, and we would ask that the witnesses respond to those in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.